Sorry, yeah.
That's the first hour was devoted to kind of laying out what Close Encounters is from a plot perspective. And what did you think, Martin? What did you think of it? Just quickly.
An overview of it, I guess, is just the life of one man who decided to trade it all to explore the universe.
And did you like it? Like,
yeah. Personally, I told you it's my dream. So yeah, I don't know, like it's one thing that like I look up in the sky and just like, whoa, can they take me now?
I think it's part
take
of
me now.
The human experience for thousands of years, looking up at the sky and kind of feeling a sense of belongingness, or like you're part of this bigger thing. The stars have been a big part of our culture for a long time now. And, you know, people in 1977 also agreed with you, Martin, because the budget was 20 million, but it made 306 million.
Jesus.
And this film, I'm going to talk about the production of it now and why Steven Spielberg made it, basically, and where he was at in his life and what led him to end up making it. The film he made before this, Martin, was Jaws. So,
Jaws.
Yeah.
From Jaws to this, it's a big step.
That's what I'm saying.
Big step.
And Jaws was let's go back. Steven Spielberg, probably one of the most famous filmmakers that everyone knows. But what they probably don't know is that in 1964 he made his first ever short film called Firelight, which has never been released fully. It was made. How old was he when he made it? He was 17 when he made it, and it was made with $500. And
at that time, that must have been like loads of money.
Well, nah, not really. Like, still under $1,000.
What?
1964, £500. He made it for the. It's the same sort of production that we'd put together now, Martin. That's the level he was on.
Mm-hmm.
And just a quick plot. Firelight follows a group of scientists as they investigate a series of coloured lights in the sky and subsequent disappearances of people, animals, objects, and from the fictional town of Freeport, Arizona. Among these abducted are a dog, a unit of soldiers, a young girl named Lisa, whose abduction induces a heart attack in her mother. The film involves a subplot involving a divorce between the main character and his wife, Debbie, the obsessive quest of the main character to convince the CIA that aliens are real. The twist comes as the aliens, represented by three shadows, reveal their purpose, which is to transport the whole of the town to their home planet to create a human zoo. So that's the first idea that Steven Spielberg had. That's the first thing he decided to commit to film. That shows
Fast forward 13 years later.
Well, it just shows you where his mind is at with this topic. He's like interested in it. Like he is.
If it's the first thing you thought about when starting making films, then you know that it's the last thing he's going to be doing before he died.
And he made that film when he was 17, but even before then, he claims that his kind of fascination with the phenomena of the unexplained in the universe began when he was watching a meteor shower with his father when he was very young. And in Jaws, there's a very famous scene at the end of Jaws where a shooting star, or, you know, people like to call it a shooting star, but there's no, like...
He hasn't mentioned anything.
Well, it's not basically. Like in the cast, like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't say shooting star played by... Like, it's not specified what it is. Yeah. It is a shooting star. It's a real shooting star. A
real one.
Yeah, and it was like, I think it was like an accident. They captured it on the film. But he kept it in because it looks cool. Like, it looks really cool. So, like, that's Spielberg's vibe. He loves the unexplained and he loves the UFO phenomenon from a very young age. And it was the whole reason that he even got into film. I'll also point out at this point that one of the first films that Spielberg made that was put onto television and that kind of got him recognition was a film called Jewel, written in 1971, which is about a man driving down a road, and then a very large truck pulls up behind him and starts shunting the back of his car, and that truck is like the villain of the film, basically. Now,
I feel like I've seen that.
you will have. It's like referenced in a lot of different media. This big truck being behind you, shunting you. It's quite a well-used motif at this point. So he made that film. I know I said that he had fond memories of a meteor shower with his father, but he made that film because his father was like so on top of him when he was younger, basically. And that truck is meant to be his dad.
Yeah.
So he has like this kind of, what's the word, treacherous relationship with his father, and there's like, he's from a family of divorce, but he is just in love with the unexplained and the unknown. And that is like the essence of Steven Spielberg and like his films. There will always be a strong family element, and you'll see the ups and downs of family life and the reality of it and the difficult emotional bits, but then you're also going to get like this air of mystery and whatnot, and that is like in all of his films, from like Ready Player One all the way back to like Jaws, sort of thing. I mentioned this because all these themes do pop up in Close Encounters. We didn't mention it talking about the plot, but there's that scene when Roy is first handling the backlash from his UFO experiences, like at his house, breaking down about it. He's crying about it because it's like intense, and the son is like, "What, you wuss, you baby," and it's like this pretty intense emotional moment between the family where the son is shouting at the dad because the dad is not acting like the man the son thinks the dad is, and it deconstructs the image of the dad. And pretty powerful stuff. That's obviously like real, you know what I mean? That's like a very real scene. Like you can tell that is Steven writing from experience. So there's no reason why the rest of this film was not written from experience. Steven puts like important, like what he's showing you on the screen is important. This film isn't just made to entertain you. This film can educate you massively. And I say this because you need to understand that the UFO phenomenon is like real, or at least a lot of people, including the people that like helped make this film and people that are in the government and people that are celebrities and all sorts of different people, will tell you that there are largely credible aspects of this phenomenon. And I'm going to call it that because that's what it is. It's a phenomenon that we like can't explain. That's the best word to describe it. It's a selection of different things that can happen that all fall under the same bracket, namely that bracket being we don't know what it is. And 3,000 years ago, you may have called that like religion. And depending on what country you lived in, you'd have a name for that religion, and all the gods would have different names. All the things that may appear to you would have different names, and it's all done via region. But as time has moved on, in the medieval times, it became very Catholic, in Europe at least, and America eventually, once that had all been set up. We're talking about demons and angels and all of that in the medieval times, and they were the things that appeared to people. If you were to see anything, it would be an angel or it would be a demon. Now, post 1950,
it'd be an alien.
Well, there's this whole, you'd call it like the New Age movement. If you don't understand that phrase, go to Wikipedia, type in New Age, and just glance at what that umbrella covers. It covers like astrology, it covers like the UFO phenomenon, it covers like tarot card reading, it covers Bigfoot, it covers like your Loch Ness Monster stuff, it covers Yeti, you know, all that stuff that you might have heard of that is known as unexplained.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, at the turn of the 1900s, a lot of stuff was happening. Like the world as we know it was like becoming what it was. And that's kind of what the world wars are. That's like all the countries that have accumulated large amounts of wealth and ideologies and different ways of running their little slice of the world that they own, bickering about which one of their way is best to run the world. Because it's kind of like the power was spilling over the borders of the countries that they ruled, and it was becoming apparent that someone needed to like rule the world. You know, there needed to be like one way for the whole thing. We're not there. Like we're getting there in 2020, but this was like being thought about like middle of the 1800s, moving towards the 1900s, and what hadn't like existed was like intelligence agencies. So I'm talking about like MI5, CIA. Government existed, but it was like a change of the guard from like royalty. So like 1600s, 1700s, like royalty's still like the dominant force. 2020, royalties are just like poster children for the country now. They don't have like genuine power like that, but in like 1700s, that's the way it was. So somewhere between 1700 and 2000, there was a changing of the guard, and like government became the way that things were ran. Well, government's like a large enterprise. A government is like hundreds of people in all different departments doing a small job, like we were talking about before. And that's like a whole different way of running things, you understand? And I say that there were no intelligence agencies in medieval times. Well, there were, and they were called like the Knights Templar. And you might have heard of these groups exist in like your kind of Assassin's Creed games, or if you've seen like the Da Vinci Code. And what these groups are,
like Knights of the Round Table and stuff like that. Like it's all in everywhere.
Well, they popped up because from biblical times, okay, let's say like zero AD is like the beginning of like is like from the moment Jesus died to now. And there's people that lived when Jesus lived that we can 100% say actually lived, like Pontius Pilate, the Roman emperor. So that's kind of like a very solid place that you can grip onto and say that happened, you know? From that moment on, the Middle East was like Jewish or Catholic, basically, with like small communities of Arabs that were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they practiced kind of like it wasn't Judaism and it wasn't Catholicism. It's like a mishmash of paganism with ideas from those other religions mixed in. But all of a sudden, knocking around like 600, 700, that sort of period of time, one of these Arabs starts talking to an angel in a cave, apparently. So an Arab in a cave develops schizophrenia, and then he names that schizophrenia or whatever he saw, and he goes down to the big black cube where everyone worships gods, and he says, "You're all like wrong because I've just met this dude in the cave that's told me that he's like the right god," which sounds very much like Moses on, you know, in the Bible. You know, all these religions are just people that see things that other people didn't see, and then they say like,
"Whoa,
I'm the one," basically. So that
I did it first. Don't know what you're talking about.
So that happened, and Islam started to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually it got so big that it kicked all the Christian people and all the Jews out of the original place where they were from, the Holy Land.
Jerusalem?
Yeah, Jerusalem. So like from 700 to, I'm going to get it wrong and people are going to kill me, but I think it was like 1500, it was run by Islam, the Middle East. And you'll find that it still is today, which becomes this interesting thing. But so Christianity was kicked out, and that's why Christians came to like England and Rome and Turkey, and that's why Christianity like took over Europe, because they were kicked out of where they're originally from.
And then they came here.
And that, as the years went on, the Catholic Church was like, we'd like to like go back to the Holy Land. like one day. That was like the plan. And they figured like if we're ever going to do that, we need to set up like some sort of like outpost near or as close to the Holy Land as we can be without getting killed, basically. Now, we can get a plane these days if we wanted to travel to Iraq, the Holy Land. But back in like 800 AD, walking from Britain to Iraq was quite a travel, quite a journey. So this outpost that existed in the Holy Land needed to be like a hospital as well to heal these people that had like made the journey, basically. And once they got to this place, you needed to be a pretty strong man to make the journey. It's only like men doing this thing because of the way women were being treated back then. And they called themselves knights. So these knights would make this pilgrimage to this hospital, okay? And the knights that made their way to this hospital in the Middle East came to be known as the Knights Hospitaller. And that is the first version of the Knights Templar. And it's also the first ever intelligence agency. Because what you've actually got happening there is two religions fighting one another. And that outpost is basically just an intelligence agency that are trying to take back the Holy Land. You understand?
Yeah.
So these would be young kind of men that were up to the challenge of traveling from Britain to the Middle East in the name of their religion. And it's like an army. It's like they're secret agents for the church. Like, for all extensive purposes, it's the first CIA. It's the first MI5 that you've got, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to remember how this even connects to this film.
Yeah.
It definitely does. It 100% does.
You kind of like lost your train of thought.
No. I remember where I was. My point was to show that the Knights Templar, like intelligence agencies, as we know them, were popping up in like the 1930s, 40s, and 50s for the first time as we know them.
Yeah.
And they were based, the way that these organizations run are based upon those old organizations, like the Templars and the Hospitallers and all of that. That's why that's important. And the intelligence agencies are important is because they deal with national security and things that might be harm to different nations. And that is where this information ends up, basically. So if there is anything legitimate going on, you'd imagine that it will be scooped up by intelligence agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And some weird stuff starts happening around the turn of the 19th century. I'm going to put a load of links with this podcast if anyone wants to go like look up any of the stuff that I'm talking about. But one of them would be what's known as the Tunguska event. And if you go to Wikipedia and...
What is that? Go on, tell me.
And look at the Tunguska event. Well, I'll read it out to you, Martin, exactly what it is. I'm not promising that this is going to be explained, but it says the Tunguska event was a large explosion that occurred near the Tunguska River in Russia on the morning of the 30th of June, 1908. The explosion happened over the sparsely populated Siberian taiga, and it flattened 80 million trees.
80 million trees.
80 million, Martin. It's classified.
What the fuck?
The explosion is generally attributed to an airburst from a meteorite. There's no crater.
What?
Nothing hit the floor. It is classified as an impact event, even though no impact crater has ever been found. There are tribal communities. It's the largest explosion to have happened, like been recorded on the planet. It's the largest impact event in recorded history.
80 million trees.
Okay. So
just imagine the diameter of one tree.
Yeah.
One full. It must have been
bonkers. I want to go there one day. But that happened, and it's unspecific as to what that is. Then at the time, well, there was like folklore that existed before government gets as official as it is, and before intelligence agencies exist. you were living on folklore. Angels, demons, fairies, and gnomes.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like silly, and especially in Britain, because, like, big culture around, like, fairies and gnomes. Like, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of children's television used a lot of that imagery and stuff like that. And it gets quite interesting if you actually, like, look at what these fairy things, like, are. They're meant to be like balls of light that float around and sometimes take children into forests. And
that's it.
Well, here we go.
That's Close Encounters, mate.
Yeah, I'll link again in the description the link to what's known as a changeling. Changeling. I don't know. I've never said
changeling.
that word.
Yeah, changeling.
I've never read it, but basically implies that there's like a fairy or some sort of demon that comes and takes your child and replaces it with like a demon child. Like an evil being, and that child then grows up to be like bad, and it always feels like it's not part of this world, and that.
That's the story of I've just seen a film that has the same sort of story. Hellboy.
Oh yeah, I need to watch Hellboy. There's loads of occult like folklore stuff tied into that series apparently.
If you find out, the thing is, a changeling's whole life is to become that children's taken life. So like, obviously, if the changeling gets taken, the child gets taken. And once the child gets taken, it's swapped with a changeling. But the changeling becomes that person. And it's like...
But there's still like this weird like thing where they feel like not part of the society that they live in, and that makes it difficult for that thing to
But they don't know that.
Well, it's like the journey of them like working it out, isn't it?
Yeah, and then, well, in Hellboy, you can see that once you see that once the changeling has been found, it will turn into a monster, and it will stay like that for the rest of its life because it's been found.
So
and it's so weird.
So that
you just said that
exists in folklore, and it's fairly well known, and it could happen. Apparently, you're meant to stay away from rings. Rings are problems, big circles in forests of mushrooms or flowers, and they're called fairy rings. And apparently, that's where you'd get taken, sort of thing. So that all sounds like very cute and fairy tale and Lord of the Ringsy almost. But there's massive parallels there between that and the UFO experience. It just looks different. The experience is just slightly different in what happens. In this film, you see Roy Neary. He's normal. He has an experience with this phenomenon, and then he's weird.
Yeah.
That's a changeling. For all extensive purposes, all the people that knew Roy changed to them that day.
Yeah.
Roy was never the same again. That's what they'd say.
So it was taken.
Well, whatever you want to fucking call it. His brain chemistry changed. Something changed. And that, it seems to be what this phenomenon can do. It seems to have a direct grip on the framework that we're running on, and it can twist our knobs and dials, and like mess with the frequency that we're tuned into and whatnot. Another event that you might want to look at that happened around this time is known as the Battle of Los Angeles. I'm just going to type that in, and that actually happened whilst World War II was happening in Los Angeles, as the name may describe. And basically what happened is, in the middle of the night on February 24th, 1942, just an incredibly large object was spotted over Los Angeles, and the military proceeded to absolutely pound it for like hours. Hours. Let me try and find how long.
What? Like,
they were shooting anti-aircraft guns, which shoot shells, Martin, that are like the size of this at it for hours. And it just carried on going, and very slowly in the direction that it was continuously going. And it ended up on the front page of the paper. And because the war was happening at the time, the implication is that it was like the Japanese. But Ah, the ice cream man's there.
Wait.
Get yourself a knobbly bobbly.
What the fuck? What is the ice cream man doing?
He's a good bloke.
Social distancing.
I saw one on Victoria Park today, and I thought that, like, how do you serve the ice cream? But whatever. So, yeah, I mentioned that because if you see the picture that was on the front page of the paper, it's bonkers. It's like 7 or 8 searchlights all pointed at this one thing, and you can't like see what it is. But there's been loads of people that have like taken the photo and like meddled with it and stuff like that. It's definitely not a smoking gun. Something happened, and like hundreds of people saw it. And this is the thing: there's numerous events where there's like hundreds of people. One more event I'm going to mention, and there's relevance to all these events and why I'm mentioning them. It's because they're referenced in Close Encounters. The last one that I'm going to mention is called Fatima, the Miracle of the Sun, which just sounds crazy. Like that, they're words that you're probably not used to hearing. And what that was...
Fatima is the name of one of this Indian girl that I know that used to work with one of my mates called Grant.
That's good to know. I hope Fatima's doing well. And well, Fatima in this case is a place in Portugal. And in 1917, 3 children claimed they saw the Virgin Mary. Okay.
Right.
And these children claimed to see the Virgin Mary a fair bit, and started telling people that they were seeing the Virgin Mary in their local village. And everyone, in a very normal manner, said, haha, kids being kids and stuff like that. And eventually the kids were like, yeah, Mary's going to like appear at this time, at this place. And the word spread around the village. And 100,000 people, Martin, turned up.
100,000 people?
I can show you
from
pictures.
A village? One...
They came from all over Spain, Portugal, and Europe. When I say the news spread, I mean the news spread.
Well, when did this happen?
1917. But they kind of like built up a name for themselves. So the main event happened in the October of 1917, but it started in like the spring. They started seeing the Virgin Mary. The children reported a prophecy that a prayer would lead end to the Great War, and that on October 13th, the Virgin Mary would reveal her identity and perform a miracle so that everybody may believe. Okay?
And what happened?
So the 13th rolls round, 100,000 people all turn up in this field. They saw the sun dance. The clouds opened. I'm just going to read exactly what it says. After a period of rain, the dark clouds broke and the sun appeared as an opaque spinning disk in the sky. It was said to be significantly duller than normal and cast multicolored lights across the landscape, the people and the surrounding clouds. The sun was then reported to have careened towards the earth before zigzagging back to its normal position. Witnesses reported that their previously wet clothes became very dry very quickly, and the wet and muddy ground had previously been soaked and was completely dry. That is just simply like 100,000 people. There's pictures of this shit, and it looked like a music festival, Martin. Like crowds as far as the eye can see. This all sounds like nonsense. This sounds like the words. There's like so many pictures from the event. It's mind-boggling. This sounds like nonsense. It sounds like the sort of thing. In 1930, the Catholic Church, the Pope, officially admitted that that was an official miracle.
Wow.
They still, to this day, in 2017, Pope Francis approved the recognition of the miracle involving 2 children who were involved in the Fatima event of 1917, which paved their way for canonization, which means they're treated the same as Jesus and his 12 disciples. They're part of, like, the canon. So
Jesus.
That's just out there. That is just out there for you to go and look at. And that, like, stuff, that's just one event. I can give you 100 more if anybody wanted to have a conversation about it. You get what I mean. And that's why at the Close of First Encounters, when you hear a man talking about the sun dancing, that was like a 20-minute thing that I just said to you. Difficult to like wrap your head around, pretty crazy. But Close Encounters just like brushes over it and just shows you the phenomenon quickly and shows you that all these events that I'm talking about, Tunguska, Battle of Los Angeles, Tunguska is natural phenomenon. Battle of Los Angeles is a military event, and Miracle of the Sun would be considered Catholic dog shit to most people. Those three things are all in this, all triggered by the same intelligence. That's the point that one must understand, or at least that was the understanding of the US military in the 1940s. That was like, these were the conversations that were being had because these events were happening. I'm sure you've heard of a band called the Foo Fighters, Martin. Everybody knows about the Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters, that term, what does that mean? That's not a normal term. That term Foo Fighters is only known for the band. Well, Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, who started the band, will tell you that Foo Fighter was a term that World War II pilots used to come up with small balls of light that would fly alongside their planes that the British thought were German intelligence. Then the war ended. Germans didn't have that technology. So it was like, well, what was that then? Like, and it was...
Did they ask the Germans? Did the Germans say...
That's what I'm saying.
What did the Germans say?
The war ended, and they asked the Germans, and the Germans were like, no, that wasn't us.
They thought it was the US.
They thought it was us. So they called them the Foo Fighters. And Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters obviously thought that was a horrendously interesting story. And there may, you know, I'd like to play devil's advocate with myself. For anyone that might be like, well, it's just a coincidence. He just saw that term and liked that term. The first album was released on Roswell Records, which was a record label set up by Dave Grohl himself. So Dave Grohl has an active interest in the UFO phenomenon, as do many different famous people. But I'm just showing you how these events have massively influenced the culture and the world that we live in today, but a lot of people aren't aware of them and stuff like that. So because these events were building up and the public were knowing about them, the Roswell event then happens in, I want to say it's 47. I should know this. I've looked at Roswell many a different time. It is 47, June of 1947. And that's like the most well-known UFO case that has been brushed off as a weather balloon or some...
A weather balloon.
Crap or something.
If you ever think that this shit is what the government is telling you to say, even though it doesn't look like what they said, then
But Roswell's
lost it.
Yeah, Roswell's important because it's like the cherry on top of the cake. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back in the government's point of view. The issue becomes so public at this point that the government starts an official office to start dealing with UFO reports. And it's the first time that ever happens. So that's important. And it's called...
That's still going on to this day?
Well, this is the whole thing, Martin.
What's it called again?
Project Sign is the first version.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, just let me check that. Because the name of the UFO project that the USA runs just changes all the time. And there's a reason it changes all the time, and it's so people don't pay attention to it, and it's very clever. But for people that do want to pay attention to it, it makes it difficult keeping track of it. So when it was first set up in 1948, it was called Project Sign. And Nathan Twining, who was an Air Force general, a very well-known Air Force general, initially called it Project Saucer. But then it was renamed to Project Sign. And the goal of the project was to collect, evaluate, and distribute within the government all information relating to UFO sightings on the premise that they might represent a national security concern. That is official government legislation acknowledging that there is something happening in the sky. And that was over 70 years ago. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That happens.
You seem to be getting into this.
Well, it's
I see that
thing, and you can't kind of watch this. I think it adds a whole new dimension to this film, and one may want to listen to this, go look at the things that I talk about, then rewatch that film, and realize that maybe life's a bit different to what you thought it was. But so Project Sign happens. At first, the project hypothesized that it must be Soviet weapons. World War II had just like happened, and there's all this fear about like Russia because they've scooped up some of Germany's scientists and technology and whatnot, and now like America and Russia all have nuclear weapons, and they're like pointing them at one another, and it becomes this Cold War thing that we all know. Project Sign's final report, which was published in 49, so that means the project ran for just a year. It's just like a year look into it. That means in 1948 it was becoming a problem to the government that people were saying they were seeing things in the sky. So
constantly.
So
they made a...
Yeah, so they started looking at it. And the last report in 1949 stated that whilst some UFOs appeared to represent physical craft, there was not enough data to determine their origin. Almost all cases were explained by ordinary courses, but the report recommended a continuation of the investigation of all sightings. So that means taxpayer money was put into the continuation of the sightings. That means the government thought that there was cause to keep spending your money looking for something that most people think is absolute codswallop. This project was then renamed to Project Grudge.
And I bet it just keeps getting changed every year so people don't follow it.
Well, you catch on, Martin. You catch on fast.
Yeah.
Grudge is ran by a man called J. Allen Hynek. Now, Mr. Hynek is a very important man because he is like the leader of it all. He is like the head scientist that knows the most about all of this. He's also the reason that everyone thinks that all UFO crashes are either swamp gas or weather balloons. Because he said to the public in a newspaper, in a press conference, a good amount of UFO sightings are weather balloons and atmospheric phenomena. He also said that 10% of them, we don't know what they are. And that's the bit that people should have focused on. But it's the weather balloon and the swamp gas bit, the bit that we can identify that has been zoomed in on.
They're like, oh, okay, so if 10% can't be identified, it must be a weather balloon because the other 90% are what it is. It's like, well, if you can't identify it, you can't really say that it is a weather balloon or not. But they say, I sort of get why people are so like reluctant to look at it, just because of the fact that if you're given a big margin and then about something that is like, oh, well, this is explained 90% of the time, and the other 10% of the time, it's not explained. People are constantly just going to be thinking, well, if we should go with the 90% and not look into the 10% because it might be the same thing. Obviously, it's not true.
That's what happened. Like
that's why it's happening right now.
From a public's point of view, that is basically what happened, and it was really pushed that most of the viewings are explainable. But if you look at the hard data, they are unexplained cases, and it's in those unexplained cases. So Grudge eventually becomes this thing called Project Bluebook. That's starting to ring some more bells now for you.
Yeah.
So see how it all becomes stuff that we end up. We're only learning about Bluebook now. The History Channel has a show on Bluebook, and it's the sort of show that wouldn't get taken seriously by scientific people. So I don't see it as like good progression.
Scientific people. It should be scientific people should be looking into it.
Be paying attention to it, but it's because it's on the History Channel and shows like Ancient Aliens, History Channel, and it comes with a certain stigma. The history, like there was a time when the History Channel had a good reputation for actually showing credible history, but it's moved into areas now that people don't see as credible. So anything that's on the History Channel is now not seen as credible, which is just bonkers. It's become like the opposite of what it started out to be. But people will know Bluebook if they watch like Twin Peaks, because it's transpired that is what Twin Peaks is basically about, Operation Bluebook. And it's been in quite a few different bits of media. There's a television show on the History Channel. Battlestar Galactica talks about it. There was a show called Project UFO, which was pretty on top of it. And Blue Book's like the culmination of Sign and Grudge. So like Sign gets turned into Grudge, and Grudge gets turned into Blue Book, and all the data from the previous ones gets put on top of one another. So Sign was in 1947, Grudge was in 1949, Blue Book was in 1952. And I said, in that little bracket of UFO sightings that were unexplained, you can go find people, namely one individual, has put all those sightings together. And they're some of the most fascinating sightings you will ever read, Martin. They are ones where people get out of craft and actually talk to people, and there's like communication going on. And for a hot second in the 1950s there seemed to be like a very real thing going on that's very different to the UFO phenomenon that exists today. It was either, if I like a lot, there's good reason to suggest that like Russia or a small percentage of the Nazi thing was like operating the UFO or had something to do with the UFO phenomenon in the 1950s. Because something happened in the 1930s called, a man wrote a book called War of the Worlds, which was about aliens invading.
Yeah.
And a man called Orson Welles read that book over the radio, and people turned their radios on and didn't know that it wasn't the news and that it was a book that was being read, and they all thought the world was being invaded, and it caused mass panic. And Stalin, who was running Russia at that point, looked at America and thought, well, they're pretty like easy to control. They're pretty scared of them like aliens that don't really exist. You know, that's like quite like a good way to get them all to panic and like shake things up over there. So let's just say that there's people that love the idea of aliens, and they're putting their own UFOs up there made out of dustbin bin lids and shit like that, because that was definitely happening. That was 100% happening. Then you identifying planes in the sky and thinking they're UFOs. Then you've got potential planes that the military might have actually been flying around that were like a bit quicker than the ones that everyone knew about. So then people saw them and are like, I don't know what they are in the sky. Then you've got like this thing that was going on between Russia and America and possible breakaway parts of the German constituency that might have been using the UFO phenomenon for mass fear and terror. And then you've got the possibility that there might actually be like this phenomenon at play, like an intelligence that's like dealers. So they're all the possibilities of what a UFO like can be. And they're all
many.
Yeah, they're all the data points that were covered across like Project Bluebook. Project Bluebook ends in 1970. Okay?
1970.
Yeah, it goes on for you know,
for 18 years.
Yeah, 18 years. It has a pretty good, and it ends with this thing called the Codon Committee. Now, the Codon Committee is like the last time that the US government openly paid attention to UFOs. And
it's probably because they actually found something.
Well, J. Allen Hynek, who ran Blue Book, was constantly contacting the Air Force, telling them to go back over the data. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The military basically set up a situation where they could say a press conference.
Yeah.
And they could speak to the public and say that this isn't a problem. Like, it's not a national security issue, so we shouldn't pay attention to it, and the US government will not be paying attention to it anymore. That's what happened. And Project Bluebook was shut down, and from the public's point of view, UFOs weren't a problem anymore.
No, they were. They ain't real anymore. They've disappeared.
So one may say at this point that we have drifted far away from the movie that we were originally looking at, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm-hmm. Just a little bit.
Now, that man that ran Project Bluebook, Dr. Hynek, he had an apprentice, an intern, if you will, a young French boy by the name of Jacques Vallée, who worked at the French UFO. He was interested in the phenomenon in the 1950s in France, heard about Hynek and Bluebook and the government's work, and he was like a scientist anyway, and through his scientist actions, managed to go to America and become Hynek's like right-hand man with the whole thing. Now, Jacques Vallée is like, if you're talking UFOs and you want to get in that game, you can go buy a load of books about people that reckon that they got like stuff shoved up their anuses, and they're going to talk about like meditating to talk to aliens, and it's all going to get very weird. Or you can go read a Jacques Vallée book and get some of the most like credible information you're going to see on the topic. He's like straight. Like you could show him to like your mum and dad. He's like a school teacher. He talks like Jordan Peterson, kind of. Like he's that kind of character. He's not like a weird dude at all. He's very like normal. And some of his books are like, they were groundbreaking in the field, because back in the 1950s, all the men, old white men that were like in the American military at that time, were not ready to talk about like spiritualism. The 60s hadn't even happened yet, you know, like free love, Beatles and all that, like that hadn't even happened. So you've got these men who are like pretty much Christian. Their parents would have been pretty strict Christian. Their parents grew up in like the 1800s, and it was a lot stricter. The dogma, Catholic dogma, sat on top of you a lot more back then. And this thing starts happening, and a lot of them thought looking into this stuff was like the stuff that we shouldn't look at. It's like humans trying to be God. And it scared them, and they said from a religious standpoint we shouldn't be looking at this stuff, and it's like the devil, and it's demonic, and the craft were definitely made of screws and nuts and bolts. And Jacques Vallée was the first one to look at everything Hynek had put together and say, this is obviously a wide phenomenon, that obviously he came up with what's known as the extra-dimensional hypotheses. So whereas you've got all these people that think it's nuts and bolts and they flew here and it's all very much like a car but in space, then you've got Jacques Vallée that's like, no, this thing can like appear wherever it wants, and it comes from like a different band of reality than we're like tuned into. He was saying that in like 1957, and people were like, what are you talking about?
Who the fuck are you?
But he stuck next to Hynek's side and basically spent a lot of time finding out that Hynek was part of a group called the Rosicrucians. Now, the Rosicrucians are a group very much like the Knights Hospitaller that I was talking about earlier. They are kind of like a secret society that meets up, and they're like lightly Christian in their operation, but it's more about humans getting together and using their unified spirit to create something that's good for society and the human race. That's like the whole vibe of it all. And it's an offshoot.
So fair play then?
Yeah, it's an offshoot of like Freemasonry and the Knights Templar and all of that. And it still exists to this day. That is one that is still operating right now. And Hynek, leader of Project Bluebook, is like part of this group. And Vallée, Jacques Vallée being his young protege, gets like read into the group, basically. Now, everyone in this group, so it's like I know this is a lot to take on board. Rosicrucianism is just like the rule book that they play by. There's loads of different Rosicrucian groups around the world. Yeah? This specific Rosicrucian group calls themselves the Invisible College. And basically what they are people in the US government and intelligence community that have the same ideas about certain things, namely the way aliens and the way the world works and spiritualism. And because those topics, you're not really meant to talk about them in the science community, and you're not really meant to talk about those things in government and stuff like that, they have to meet in secret.
And do it. All right. Yeah.
They do it. So that, at this point in 2020, that is 100% fact. The man has written many books on it, and what Jacques Vallée is doing now, he's still alive. Jacques Vallée is very old at this point.
Probably like 97.
He is getting the 80. No, he's 80. So he's
80?
He's not doing too bad. Vallée went on to work on the first version of the internet. This man is like important. This is not just like some UFO kook that wrote a book. The man works at Stanford Research, which is like the scientific place in America to be working for. He worked on ARPANET, which was the first wide area packet switching network, which is the internet. And he was working on that in the 60s. He was going to websites in the 60s. Like, he has been aware of the world that we live in now for a long time before it even existed. He knew what it would look like and all of that. So Vallee's like important. And Vallee, from, I think he released the first one in 1980. So in 1980, Vallee released his diaries from the 50s.
From the 50s?
Yeah, when he first was meeting Hynek and all of that. And then in the 90s, he released his diaries from the 60s. Then in 2010, he released his diaries from the 70s. And he's only just released, they're called Forbidden Science, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're getting more expensive every single time he releases one. And I think it's because the information in those books is like
Have you read them?
Edge. I've got all 4 of them. I've read number 1 like cover to cover, but then the other ones I use for like, I don't have time to like read them all, but if I need to know, I've got them on the Kindle app, and if I need to know what Jacques Vallée thinks about a certain UFO case or a certain thing within the UFO world, I can just go into the Kindle app and search that book for that word, and it will take me to the exact day when Jacques Vallée first became aware of that thing, which is a good resource to be having.
Yeah, that's fucking sick.
Those books are crazy full of information. He meets everyone that has been mentioned in the UFO game. He basically gives his opinion on them all. He meets all sorts of people. He even meets a young filmmaker called Steven Spielberg, who decides that he likes Jacques Vallée so much that he's going to write a character called Claude Lacombe, all based on Mr. Jacques Vallée. And he has many conversations.
The guy plays him well, though.
Yeah, he does. And
well.
So Claude Lacombe is kind of this mix of Hynek and Vallée put into one person, which makes Close Encounters an increasingly true story, because you see the government operation.
It's either science fiction or a documentary.
Well, I'm just going to read to you. This is what Hynek actually had to say about the film. Hynek himself only died a few years ago. He's a well-known individual. He died, I think it was last year. What am I talking about? I must be thinking about someone else. Hynek died in 86. There's someone that's really important in the UFO world that died a couple of years ago. But anyway, Hynek, about Close, he was hired as a scientific consultant on the film along with Vallée. And this is what Hynek has to say about it. Hynek felt that even though the film is fiction, it's based on the most part on the known facts of the UFO mystery, and it catches the flavor of the phenomenon. Spielberg was under enormous pressure to make another blockbuster after Jaws, but he decided to make a UFO movie. He put his career on the line.
And it made him so much more money.
Spielberg asked NASA to be involved in the film, and NASA sent him a letter back that was 20 pages long saying that the film was dangerous. It was at that point that Spielberg knew he had to release the film.
He has to.
So you asked me a question a second ago. Is Project Bluebook, or is there a UFO program right now?
Yeah, I did ask you.
Well, officially the answer is no. And
well, unofficially,
as of 1970, it ended there. But what I can tell you, and for maybe when this information first came out, there was no like connection between the UFO phenomenon and what I'm about to tell you. But I can tell you now, and the connection can be made through the people that worked on these projects, is that, I'm just trying to find the year of this before I say it. In 1978, only 8 years after Bluebook shut, and I imagine this project took some time to set up, and stuff was happening, a lot of different programs were happening that was crazy, a project called the Stargate Project was set up, and the whole point of the Stargate Project was to Well, it was actually set up in response to the idea that the Russians had managed to set up some sort of mind control unit of their government where they could take soldiers and kind of wipe their brains and make them run into battle with no fear and stuff like that, creating what would be known as like a super soldier. And they were experimenting with things like hypnotism, and they were also experimenting with people that claimed that they could like remote view, which is, for those of you who don't know, something that spiritualist people claim they can do, where they can visualize a time and a place and actually be there and see that place, like be it Mars or be it the dinosaur age, or I've seen no end of people talk about remote viewing. It's another one of those things like the UFO phenomenon where there's a load of absolute cack surrounding it, and then there's like a little bit of nugget in the middle where there's actually some people where some stuff's gone on where you're like, okay, that's
happened.
Now, yeah, so Bluebook ends 1970. Then in 1971, a man called Andrej Puric, who is a Croatian man who basically made his way into the Pentagon as a psychological researcher, a physician, and author. He's just one of the most outrageous human beings you may ever come across, Martin. This man has led a life that should not be real. If half of what this man has claimed to have done and experienced is real, then this reality is simply not what I was sold, at least. Now, the deal with Mr.
It sounds interesting already.
Yeah, the deal with Mr. Puric is that in 1952, he was going to a lot of parties, and at these parties were like famous people. Namely, he got talking to an individual called Arthur Bell, who was the founder of what's now known as Bell Helicopters, one of the biggest helicopter companies in the world. He got talking to one of the members of the Astor family, who are one of the most wealthy families in the world. Several different people like that. 9 of them specifically that all seem to have a certain connection to Mr. Puric. And at a party, a Hindu mystic called Dr. D.G. Vinod was known for kind of being able to get himself into a trance-like state where he would speak in a voice that was not his. And Puric was quite interested by this concept. One day I'm going to make like a video essay on YouTube, like explaining this whole story with sources and everything, but because this sounds like nonsense, but there is full. I can tell you whose party it was. I can tell you like this person who used to host these parties 100% did used to host parties, and she was known as like a socialite, and the whole story's there. Like, the whole thing is there. I'm just brushing over it right now because, number one, because I don't want to confuse too many people listening, and because I don't want to confuse you. I want to keep it, like, nice and easy. Yeah. Dr. Vinod, as at one of these channeling sessions, claimed that he had contacted a group of intelligences that called themselves the Nine.
The Nine.
The Nine. Now, I'm just going to point out that the Greek pantheon of gods and the Egyptian pantheon of gods all had 9 all-powerful gods. So there seems to be some correlation between...
Sounds like the plot of the Holy Mountain, 9 immortals.
Yeah, it's these immortals that are being referred to, and these immortals come up in 1800s, 1700s spiritualism. It seems to be 9 intelligences that span the human psyche and represent everything that we know, the good and evil and the duality of man. And these intelligences apparently were communicating with Mr. Puric from the years of 1952 all the way up to about 1980, and through different people as well, which is even more bonkers. Now, Uri Geller meets Puric in 1971, and under hypnosis, starts talking about the nine. Again.
Yeah. It's all right.
Purich claimed that he observed Geller turn metal into gold using psychic power. Purich stated that Geller teleported a dog through the walls of his house.
What the fuck?
In his dark biography of Geller, Yuri, The Mystery of Yuri Geller, Purich claimed that with Geller he had communicated to super-intelligent computers from outer space. According to Purich, the computers sent messages to warn humanity that a disaster is likely to occur if humans do not change their ways. Purich claimed that extraterrestrial beings had communicated to him that Geller was the chosen savior for humanity, and he had been given the ability to contact flying saucers and perform paranormal phenomena such as psychokinesis.
Is he dead?
Yuri Geller is alive right now and goes on British television all the time and talks about a whole load of shit that ain't this, and it's very peculiar.
Like, it's not that I'm confused. I'm more like, if this actually happened, then, like you said, this is. I'm not sold with this fucking
this thing
reality we're in.
Yeah. So all of this sounds like nonsense, and why would there be any need in ever listening to this tripe? Well, you find out that Purich was running or had very close links to Project Stargate, which was using taxpayer money to see if any of this stuff had military application. Harold Putoff, who ran Operation Stargate, was like a Scientologist before all of this, and he got all the way to the top of Scientology and then left Scientology. So one may even suggest that Mr. Putoff was some sort of American spy designed to get all the solid information out of Scientology and then bring it to Stanford Research, where he set up the Stargate Project. You know what I mean? And use all that information that was actually legitimate in Scientology, because Scientology has been written off as this crazy thing because everyone's seen Tom Cruise jump up and down on a couch and they're like, oh my God, he's crazy. He must be Scientology, must be making him go mad. And there's certainly parts of Scientology that have been warped, but it's just like the Catholic Church in that there are parts of the Catholic Church that are like good. There's parts of Christianity that's like good for the soul and stuff like that. Very much like, you know, Jesus is king and that whole message. But then there's parts of Christianity that are like evil and have been set up to trap people and keep them within Christianity. And it's exactly the same with Scientology. And so this thing starts happening, Project Stargate, and it's inherently connected to the UFO phenomenon. Like Yuri Geller's talking about like people are still seeing UFOs and stuff. And this Stargate thing's happening. And you can go on the CIA website right now. I'll throw these links in the description. And look at the Stargate Project and the papers that have been declassified from it. And what you will find is Harold Putoff interviewing people that are claiming that they are remote viewing Mars. And it's like 20-page transcripts of people describing a race of people living on Mars and massive pyramids and all this shit. This wouldn't, if any normal person came with this information and said it to you, you'd be like, you're crazy and I don't need you in my life. But it's the fact that this was all funded by taxpayers' money. And obviously somewhere down the line, there's somebody that's deciding to use taxpayer money for this that thinks that this is a good use of taxpayer money, which implies that the whole thing is real. Like, you get it? Like,
yeah.
This all sounds crazy, but it happened, and it was used with your money. And Steven Spielberg...
Well, people nowadays are going to be like looking into it like, well... if I don't see it, it's not real. Do you know what I mean? Like,
you know, we've got into this idea that like seeing is believing, but that creates. I can show you how that mindset is unhealthy, and I'll show you by showing you that things like the flat Earth mindset have developed out of this. Well, I've not seen the planet as one whole thing, so how do I know that it is a ball? You know, it's flat. It's not a healthy attitude. You're not giving people answers, though they're coming up with their own answers based upon the information that they've got, but the information they've got is shit. So they come up with is bollocks. It's becoming a large problem, and this is a tale. It's like a 5-hour conversation, the whole thing, and I think I've given people enough in this episode to show you that just a simple film that is so well known, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, everybody knows that phrase. Everybody knows the music at the end of it and the theme, and it's really well known. And Spielberg's like the most well known filmmaker of all time. They all choose to talk about this. He put and there's
now I know.
There's obvious points within that film that as soon as you start looking into the production of it, you can see that he had an interest in it as a real thing and not just as a fun little idea for a film. So that is what I'd highly recommend. I'll throw like as many links as I can in the description of this for you to go and do your own research on it. But you've got to have that hunger for it. Like if you're not interested in it, then you're never going to be able to like gain a comprehension of it.
No, of course not. People that are not so like fully interested in it and just want to be like, well, I just want to find something that says it's not real, and then I'm okay with that.
I'll 100% admit it's so much easier to ignore it. So much easier. But why why make life easier in lieu of ignorance? That's ignorance. You'd want to learn information about stuff.
That's it.
Just to answer that final question, which I have been trying to answer now for like an hour, is there a current UFO program within the US government? These UFOs that you are seeing in the news right now were filmed from fighter jets in 2004. They were filmed on the planes came from an aircraft carrier called the USS Nimitz, and they were doing a training exercise, which is standard. Like you take off from the aircraft carrier and you do exercises to practice if the enemy was in the area, and then you come back down to the aircraft carrier and land. Whilst this was happening, a disc appeared. It managed to be very high up in the air and then drop, so it was hovering above the sea like instantly. It performed a few different maneuvers that completely outclassed any aircraft that exist on this planet and performed things that defy the laws of physics. For example, the training exercise was happening a few miles away from the ship, and they started to go back to the ship, I think, and the craft was already there. But it had beat them there. And they couldn't believe it. And stuff like that. And this guy, the pilot that filmed it from his plane, has gone on Joe Rogan. His name's David Fravor, and he says his testimony. And this is like the smoking gun UFO case. You can't mess with it. And it first got announced in 2017, just as the Trump-Hillary thing was happening, and it all came from a group called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, started by the ex-lead singer of the band Blink-182. And when that happened, everyone made fun of him and said, they're filmed on thermal cameras that F-17 Super Hornets use. Everyone's like, oh, why doesn't it look like an iPhone camera video? Because they're planes and they're using cameras that are used to identify like heat-seeking missiles. It's a different world to the one that we're like dealing with. So you see this thing, and people didn't understand what they were seeing initially. And although To the Stars did the best of their ability to label the videos with all of what you were seeing, there was something about the tone and the way it was released that just didn't resonate with people. Mostly because the US government came out and said that those videos were not real. And that caused like this weird 2-year period where like I'd read enough about it to understand that they were real, but you couldn't like talk about it. I've had friends like make fun of me and like whatnot. I don't know why I should expect them or anyone I know to have any sort of confidence in this, because no one knows what this thing is. But I just wish people would be open to talking about it and like not instantly just saying that there's no use in like looking
there's no UFOs. I'm like, no.
Then 2 years goes by and a lot happens in my life and everyone else's life for us just to find out, not a month ago, that yes, these videos are real. Of course they're real. And this is like the beginning of us beginning to talk about this topic for the first time, because those people that I just mentioned who were in the government and the military when this phenomenon first started becoming really obvious, that said it was demonic and that we shouldn't have looked at it, well, they died. And we've learned a bit more about this phenomenon now, and we've kind of got to a position where we kind of understand it a little bit more, and we're kind of ready at this point to deal with it. And that's why the conversation is happening right now. And in I'll definitely link in the description. The videos were first shown in a New York Times article written by Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenfold, called Black Auras, Black Projects and Glowing Auras, the US government's secret UFO program. And it transpires since Project Bluebook, yes, there have been UFO programs in the American government. One was called ORSAP, and then the other one was called ATIP. And ATIP is Advanced Threat. Let me get it. I wouldn't want to get it wrong. ATIP stands for Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program.
Advanced
Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So in 1970, the findings of Project Bluebook were that UFOs were not a threat. In 2004, there was a program that was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, inherently implying that they were a threat, and that we have been paying attention to it for some time. That program started in 2007 and had $22 million given to it over 5 years. That's $22 million of taxpayer money was deemed acceptable to go into this. And that is just one program. We know at this point, because the person who ran ATIP is now the co-owner of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. Forward to the Stars Academy Arts and Science second book. His name's Jacques Vallée. You want to know who the third owner of To the Stars Arts Academy and Science is? Harold Puthoff. So, like, the cream of the crop of all these people.
It all comes together.
Yeah, all those people that I mentioned from, like, the 70s that were, like, really involved in this and, like, involved in the Close Encounters production. They are now all grouped together under one umbrella, the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. They have this guy called Steve Justice. He used to run what was known as Skunk Works, which was the branch of Area 51 that built, like, the Blackbird plane and the stealth bomber and all of that. He just works up to the stars now. You've got, like, all sorts of people associated with that program, with that institution, whatever you want to call it. It's unique, and it's certainly scary, and it's like no other organization really else apart from Tesla's, like the closest of one I can think of it, just in the fact that they do lots of different things that the common man's like, I don't see the connection between rockets and cars. That's why you don't work at Tesla, and that's why, like, you're at the pub complaining about Elon Musk and not changing the world like these people are. And that'll just, there is a current UFO program, Martin, and there's never been a better time to be looking into this stuff. And never go into it with a confidence. Like, this stuff is real. There's stuff out there, and stuff has directly been.
You have to go into it with an open mind. You can't just be like, I'm trying to find a reason for it not to be real. Do you know what I mean?
And if something
go into it with a reason to, like, be amazed. Does this actually happen?
Want to be amazed by it, and people will be like,
wonder.
well, you're just, like, convincing yourself that it is real. Okay, well, that's fine. And if that is the case, then I'll accept that. But I've used the knowledge that I've garnered from the phenomenon, and that's what I call it. And I put meditation under it, and I put spiritualism under it. I put every act of my body underneath the bracket, to be perfectly honest with you. And I've used it to benefit my life. So I know it's what you make of it, you know? Do you want to change yourself? Do you want to take on board things that might change who you are and, like, the way that you interact with people? And just keep a level head is what I'd say to anyone going into this stuff, and just look for facts. Just look.
There's nothing else to do.
Yeah, something's going on, and it's exciting. Go and find out what's going on.
It is very exciting to like look into something that may not be explained, but it is happening. You know what I mean? Like
that's explained. Like, I know all the stuff that's explained. I get it. Like how to talk and walk and how to be in society and work and 9 to 5. That I get it all. It's quite a small part. Like I don't see that as the whole of life. But people are like, some people that's their whole life. But for me, that's just the stuff other people want me to do that I don't actually want to, but I know how to do.
Yeah. This is on another level.
Uncharted waters. It's like, it's exciting. It's like you fall in and you look for stuff to cling on to. But yeah, I don't want to get too into it. And you can, the more you talk, you can.
Yeah, you don't want to get too much into it. You spend 2 hours in it.
My point, Martin, is that with appropriate levels of coffee and food in front of me, I can keep going.
Forever.
This story, this is not the end of this story, and this is just a thin slither of this story. And stories can get simpler. The more you tell them, it gets easier to tell a story, and you get to the point where you can kind of summarize the story in a much shorter way than when you were first learning the story. Like, I can tell you what happens in, like, the third Harry Potter book pretty quickly, under a couple of minutes, if you needed me to. I want to get this story to that level. Because I think there's people that have directly invested interest in me not knowing this story in a way that I can just, like, chat with you about it over a coffee.
The thing is, because there's so much stuff out there that isn't explained but has an explanation to it, like because somebody's hiding the truth from me, I guess. It sort of makes it like more intriguing to like find out. Do you know what I mean? You know, when you like find out a piece of like that nugget in the middle where you're like, oh shit, this is the truth.
Well, and before 100%. And before we were recording on this, we were talking about Easter eggs in games, and it's just that in real life. I'm just going after the real world Easter eggs.
A lot of the people in the world are like, yeah, you know what? I've had enough Easter eggs in my life. I don't need any more.
They are. I just cannot wrap my head around that attitude.
Mentality. Yeah, there isn't. Yeah, like I wish.
It makes me feel that you must not be comfortable somewhere in your life because, or you don't understand a part of your life. Because I understand my life fairly well, and it's that solid understanding of what's real that allows me to start looking at things that might not be real.
There was a meme that I saw a couple of years ago that sort of like fits into this quite well, where the sort of punchline of the meme doesn't really make sense, but like the bit that does make sense is when it says born too late.
No, I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, born too late to explore the world and born too early to explore the universe.
Stuff. Born at exactly the right time to explore my mind, bitch.
No. It says, in the one I saw, it was like, it says, born at the right time to explore these dank memes. But that obviously, that's nothing to do. Yeah?
That is not a healthy attitude.
No, of course not. But like, the what it says in the meme is like, it's sort of true. You know what I mean? Like, there's still places in the world that need to be discovered. Like, obviously, we've only explored 5% of the ocean.
Nah, the point is correct though, Martin. That's what I was talking about saying at the beginning of the 1900s. Everyone had done everything. Like, all the people that mattered, the people that had money, understood like the world. Travel. Yeah, the world. And that's why we started thinking about going up. And that's why we started. We started thinking about like the right way to rule the world, and how that's why that conversation even came around, is because the people that were powerful were looking around like, yeah, we kind of like done everything around here. Like we've like captured everywhere and got all the things that we want.
Mm-hmm. Now it's time to capture other places.
Life is like a game, and there's some people that are like far ahead in the game, and that must be really exciting to be.
But it could be like Ready Player One. Could be like, okay, fine, you may have a massive company that works into making loads of money in this game to better yourself in life or whatever, but somebody will come along that is not in your company that will discover something you wish you did.
Well, the whole
instead
point
of
of
having
Ready Player One is like, be curious. It's that curiosity that's going to set you apart from all the people that think they know everything.
finding that Easter egg, bro.
Yeah, it is. There's a whole thing to this like attitude of the Easter egg hunt. It's why I was attracted to the ideas of like the Easter egg when I used to play games. There was something about you had to take initiative and want to find the Easter egg.
But you didn't even know.
Don't even think about it. Like
No,
that. You know what I mean?
But most Easter eggs that were found, like when we're talking about back in the day, most Easter eggs that were found were like stumbled upon. No one knew they were there. It wasn't that you were thinking about it. It's not that you were thinking about it. It's more like
you were like thinking in a way. To find an Easter egg, normally you have to be playing the game in a way that it's not really meant to be played.
Yeah.
That's the attitude I'm talking about. Some people just like,
yeah.
in a game, are like anxious and they do exactly what the game tells them. No, it doesn't matter. I'll say that after the podcast.
All right.
But it's the game, or I think a good game wants you to like break the rules, basically, that are put in front of you. And if you get rewarded for like having that curiosity and breaking those rules, that's exciting from a player's point of view. And I think it's a good thing to be doing from like a game designer's point of view, because it makes your player feel special and they're going to want those experiences over and over, sort of thing. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's that same thing in life. You know, if you go to anywhere, Martin, like a history museum or a science museum, or if you go to the Space Centre at Leicester, you're going to see lots of signs that talk about like weaponize your curiosity, like be curious to find out what happened. I think that is a big key in life, having like an optimistic curiosity into everything and never being like, no, that's not this. This is not like that. Like just never ever be like that. Just like be open to things.
But it does make it harder when people keep trying to stop you into doing this, being curious. Like the government will like look at Roy Neary. Look how curious it was to see this mountain, and the government's just like, you know what? You are curious, but we don't want you to know.
Yeah, but
and we'll stop you.
The minute you get backlash from being curious is when you know that you're on the right.
You're on the right. You're on the right track. But like as soon as yeah, of course, that's exactly what you want. You want somebody to be like, no, you gotta stop right there, go back, get in your lane. You know what I mean? Like get in your lane, and then once you get to a certain point, then you can come into this lane. You can't just jump. You can't just jump ahead. Then once they tell you that, you're like, I'm getting there no matter what, whether it kills me or not. You know what I mean?
That curiosity that I first stumbled across in games is incredibly useful in life.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that I garnered that from a video game, and a lot of people manage to play video games for a lot longer than I played video games and get nothing from them, either means that I'm weird and different, or everyone's a fucking idiot.
It's one of them. It's either one of them.
Yeah, definitely. I know what like the odds would say. But hey, well, the odds would say that I'm the weird. But we'll see on that one.
Mm.
But yeah, that's Close Encounters, and it's like a really well-known film that
it was a very good
take
film.
You down some interesting rabbit holes. I'm looking at it made, and you know, Spielberg
My dream.
in 2002 made a straight to television series called Taken, and it was 5 or 6 episodes, and every single episode featured on a different real UFO case.
That would be interesting to watch.
Yeah, so if anyone kind of likes Spielberg's, and he's also made Super 8, well, produced Super 8 that J.J. Abrams directed, which has a similar vibe to this, which is a good film. I'd recommend go watching. But yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, please let me know, because as you can see by this, I can talk at length on this topic. I just assume people don't want to hear me talk at length on this topic for a barrage of different reasons.
I would definitely. Well, you know, we talk about this at length when we see each other anyway. So.
Well, yeah, this is what me and Martin are talking about in our spare time, but it's more like trying to get our
other
audience
people to see
a
it.
point where they want to hear about this stuff. But that's our goal. But let us know, like, genuinely, if you enjoyed the topic of conversation on this podcast, please get in contact with us. And as always,
comments.
Yeah, in the comments, and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and it means so much to us, because it gives us it puts us a step closer to being able to do the things that we want to do. Like I'm always going to do what I want to do, but if I was supported, wow, I think I could bring like a whole world of content to you guys listening. So, but yeah, as always, kind of hit us up on all the socials. Subscribe, follow, Twitter, Instagram, mipltd.
That's right.
I've enjoyed talking to you, Martin, always.
Same here, bro. Same here. I always like listening to your little world that you're living in, and how you're feeling about these sort of topics that are coming out of the woodworks nowadays.
Yeah, and you give me some normality, you know. Locked there in my room on my own, it's nice to.
I'm the one that likes to be like, why would you let your child go through a fucking dog flap? Who?
Oh, and you always bring an angle to these films that I fail.
Jesus. Yeah. Jesus.
That smile to my face. So yeah, always appreciate the chat.
No worries, bro.
Episode 12. Here. We'll see you at lucky number 13. We'll have to do something.
That's right.
Fitting around that theme.
No. Nothing scary. Please.
Peace out.
Peace out.